Hi everyone, it's Prinkson. Today I'll be reading Nina the Killer's story. This is actually a 500 subscriber special, even though I'm pretty sure I only have 499 at the time of recording. But once again, I'd like to thank you all so much. With that said, while the art contains none of these, the story does contain plenty of gore, death, loss of sanity, just in general a lot of things you may want to avoid. If these things make you uncomfortable, I recommend muting it and playing some nice music. As it stands, though, let's get on to the video. Not long ago, I heard that there was a new murderer on the loose. I can't say I was surprised. After Jeff the Killer had made himself known and his story was leaked, dozens of copycats had followed. Most of them were largely harmless. Children making empty threats in an attempt to defend themselves like he had. Based on the picture of her I saw, I assumed she was nothing more than another fangirl. Just one that had gone too far this time. I wish I could say I was right. The further my investigation went, the more taken aback I was. She was a monster, or maybe worse. It was all so confusing. Despite all my research, I didn't know heads from tails of this case. Eventually I came across something that piqued my interest. A newspaper article that finally shed some light on what was going on. The erratic string of murders plaguing our country has been steadily increasing for the past few months. Initially, investigators thought there was only one perpetrator, but were proven wrong upon finally finding a witness. The witness stated that there are actually two killers active, attacking different cities across the state. As of yet, it is unknown whether they work together or separately. Fortunately, our team was able to contact another witness who had been hospitalized for his injuries. This is what he had to say. It was nighttime. I was walking home from my workplace alone. The place is desolate but usually safe, so I decided to take a shortcut. That was a mistake. When I was halfway home, I suddenly felt like somebody was following me. I could hear footsteps, feel their eyes on my back. I turned around and saw nothing, so I kept going. There was somebody following me, obviously. She approached. She had write this down, she had black hair with a magenta streak. She looked 16 or 17, and she didn't look human. Her skin was so pale, and her eyes had this thirst for blood. They were so wide. She didn't stop staring at me the entire time. I was so terrified, I couldn't even run. She didn't say anything for a while. It seemed like an eternity, but then she tilted her head, finally speaking up, and she said, "God, it's terrifying to remember. Go to sleep, my prince." I could finally run, but I wasn't fast enough. She stabbed me in the arm, and when I fell, she just kept stabbing and slashing at my body until I heard the police arrive. They fired several bullets in her direction, but she dodged, and she laughed. She dodged their bullets. I saw her climbing one of the houses before I blacked out. I could never forget her face, never forget her laugh. After our interview with him, the young man was found dead in his house, dismembered. Written on the wall in blood was the message, "You didn't go to sleep, my prince." The origin of Nina the Killer. Nina Hopkins was far from a productive girl. Though she was already 11, she still didn't help out with the chores at all. She didn't even open her window to let light in. Her room was constantly at dusk. Whenever she wasn't playing video games or guitar alone, she'd be deeply engrossed in anime or music. Her favorite genres were K-pop, J-pop, and rock, ignoring anyone who tried to get her attention. Those were the more presentable of her interests, at least. What she didn't tell her family was that she had an odd obsession with Jeff the Killer. She exhaled shakily as she read his story for what must have been the 1000th time. She adored him. He was her favorite. She felt a strange attraction to him. She admired him more than anything. Every time she read his story, she felt the inexplicable urge to be like him. She didn't know why, it almost disturbed her. She'd hardly started to read when her door was flung open. She jumped at the noise, but relaxed when she saw her little brother Chris and his beautiful green eyes. Nina liked to think of Chris as her little prince. Her mother had always told her fairy tales at bedtime in which the princes looked just like him. He had black hair, fair skin, and green eyes, just like their late father. Nina only had light brown hair, fair skin, and light blue eyes. Just like her mother. "Sis, it's time to eat," said Chris with an innocent smile. Nina sighed, bending down to his level. "I'm going, my prince." She pinched his cheeks. She left her laptop on the bed and went to eat. Nina had transferred schools recently, both to be closer to home and to be closer to Chris. It was his first day after all. She didn't want him to feel scared or alone. She was about to leave now, but... She paused at the feeling of the urges from last night tugging at her heart. She grimaced, but it soon twisted into a smile as she stared at her door in a daze. "Are you both ready for school?" called her mother. Nina snapped back to reality. "Yes," she replied, Chris repeating it not long afterward as Nina headed downstairs. "Well, good luck," their mother replied, giving them a smile as she passed over their lunches. "Thanks, Mom," Chris answered. Nina only rolled her eyes, adjusting her bag as she stepped out the door. Chris and Nina walked to school on their own, parting ways when they came to the gates. Chris headed to the elementary school, and Nina headed to the middle school. As boring as the classes were, she regrettably had to attend them or she would get in trouble. At lunchtime, the siblings met up again, hoping to find a quiet place to eat without worrying about other students. Nina soon found an oddly desolate garden behind the school. There wasn't a soul in sight. It was perfect. They sat and ate, expecting to have a peaceful lunch, but Nina paused when she heard footsteps. She looked up and saw a girl with black hair. She looked much older than her. "Well, well, well, what do we have here? I see you two haven't got the ropes yet." The girl gave a cocky grin, crossing her arms. "My name is Claudia. I'm basically in charge here, and if you don't do what I say, the consequences will be both harsh and immediate." She pulled a knife from the pocket of her jeans as two older boys stepped out from behind the hedge. Nina stood up quickly, moving protectively in front of Chris. "Hey, we don't want any trouble, just a peaceful lunch," Nina said. "I see, but you shouldn't be here. This area is ours," Claudia replied, tossing her knife nonchalantly in the air as she approached them. "That's stupid, you can't make us just leave," Chris yelled, stepping toward Claudia. Yoni, one of the boys, abruptly punched him in the stomach before Chris could so much as touch Claudia. "Chris!" Nina caught Chris, checking under his shirt to make sure he was okay. "Well, if you don't want to be next, I'd recommend you obey me from now on. Get out!" Claudia pointed her knife at Nina's face, glancing confidently back to her lackeys. Nina glared defiantly at Claudia for a moment before pushing herself off the ground, slamming a right hook into her face. Claudia collapsed almost immediately, seemingly all bark and no bite, and Nina took the opportunity to grab her knife. She drove it sweetly into Claudia's shoulder. Malcolm, the other boy, could only stare, shocked at the scene ahead of him. His hesitance cost him his dignity. Nina kicked him in the balls. She didn't stop there, though. Malcolm let out a yowl of pain, falling to his knees as Nina kept kicking him, soon focusing on his face instead. She kicked him until he was swollen and bleeding, begging her to stop, but she still didn't stop. Yoni took a step back, almost paralyzed with fear, but deep down he was little more than a coward. Seeing how Claudia and Malcolm were being pummeled, he took the opportunity to flee while he could. Nina's glare snapped to him. She jumped, using Malcolm's body as leverage, lunging at Yoni's stomach with the knife. "Nina!" The voice of her little brother cut through her vengeful haze. She tensed up, turning to him. Chris looked surprised, but Nina couldn't process why. She decided to let Yoni go, taking a step back as she realized what she'd done. She stared down at her blood-stained hands. She felt like a monster. But being a monster didn't feel as bad as she thought it would. She turned back to Chris, who still looked shocked. Nina glanced back to the teens on the ground before running to her brother. "Come on, we have to go," she said. They didn't look back as they left the garden. Nina waved goodbye to Chris before ducking down by the outdoor tap, rinsing her hands off. She knew she had to avoid telling anyone what happened. Her little brother Chris thought she'd been acting in self-defense, but she knew otherwise. Something horrible was growing deep inside her soul and she was helpless to stop it. But did she even want to? The day passed without further incident. The siblings greeted their mother as they returned, sitting down at the table to eat with her. "Well, how was school?" asked their mother with a sweet smile. Chris stayed silent and didn't answer the question. "Great," Nina replied, giving a strained, too wide smile. After dinner, Nina hurried upstairs. She sighed, standing before her closet, before pulling the doors open, revealing her shrine to Jeff the Killer. Taped to the walls of the closet were several Jeff the Killer posters. Hanging from the coat hangers was her exclusive Jeff the Killer clothing. Lining the shelves were Jeff the Killer notebooks, and scattered along the floor were several Jeff the Killer plush dolls. She took a doll from her closet, setting it gently down in her bed. She stared at it. She couldn't tell if the doll's sinister smile intimidated or amused her. She laid down next to it, wrapping her arms around it as she whispered, "Jeff, you made me do this." That night, Malcolm and Claudia were found unconscious in the school garden. The two wouldn't talk about what happened even when they woke up, so no culprit was identified. Nobody suspected Nina. The new girl, only 11 years old. What 11-year-old would be capable of this? Nina faced no consequences, but neither did Malcolm and Claudia. The uproar about the incident died down as soon as it started, and everything was soon as close to normal as it could be once again. Days later, Nina found a note in her locker. "I know what you did, but don't worry. I won't tell a soul. You're both skillful and dangerous." There was no name written. Whoever had seen her had chosen to stay anonymous. That was only the beginning of the end. Nina felt that she was slowly losing her mind. She slept with a knife under her pillow from that point on. It all came to a head when Nina was unable to find her brother. They'd just been playing, her mum had even been right there, providing her with a faux sense of security. When she asked Nina to get her brother so they could go home, however, "Have you seen Chris?" She glanced around anxiously as she asked, squatting down to be at his friend's level. "I think a girl with black hair took him," one of them answered simply. Nina tensed. "Thanks," she muttered almost breathlessly, pulling her knife from her hoodie pocket as she ran toward the road. She spent what felt like hours looking for him. She felt near dead on her feet. What if she never found him? Would things have been better if her mother helped her for once? What if Chris was dead? Her attention was caught suddenly by a car swerving recklessly down the street. She cautiously backed away from the road, her eyes narrowed as one of the doors opened and something was tossed out. That something screamed, "Chris!" Nina recognized the voice at once, kneeling down to hold him. Whoever was in the car cackled as they drove away. Chris! What happened?" The boy was brutally beaten, his clothes so torn that they were falling off his body. "Wanted me to play," said Chris, visibly struggling to get the words out. Nina tried to ignore the voice inside her, screaming itself raw in grief and rage. She needed to control her anger. She couldn't lash out now lest she hurt Chris. She lifted him up, cradling him in her arms as she walked over to the hospital. "Mum, Chris is hurt. Badly hurt. Come to the hospital." Nina sighed as she passed the phone back to the lady at the desk, waiting anxiously for her mother to arrive. Once she did, the two were taken aside into the room Chris was in. The doctor told them that Chris had internal bleeding and several open wounds. Nina's mother began to cry, but Nina remained entirely silent. What right did her mother have to cry? She'd done nothing. Everyone else was here to help. She didn't want to accidentally hurt any of them. The next day, Chris was released from the hospital and ordered to rest for 3 weeks before returning to school. Nina stayed by his side, keeping him company and making sure he took his medication. When she finally returned to school, she found a new note in her locker. "I'm sorry about your brother. I hope he recovers. Please don't think you're ever alone. I'm right here. I'll be your friend." Nina felt color rise to her face after reading it, checking again for a name. There was none, so she stashed it in her backpack, away from prying eyes. Weeks later, it was finally time for school picture day. Nina was ready and in her best outfit. She'd been careful to plan it out at home. Short black skirt, this one? Black stockings with red stripes, my black and blue striped tank top, and my blood red ribbon. How about a ponytail? She tried it on, smiling into the mirror before her expression abruptly dropped. Something was missing. She rummaged around in her closet before pulling out her favorite purple hoodie. She held it close to her, remembering for a moment how it reminded her of Jeff's. She slipped it on, heading downstairs to go to school with her brother. This time they took the bus. They didn't want to risk encountering Claudia and company again. Sadly, their efforts were naught. They saw the trio as soon as they arrived, and though they both agreed to avoid them, it didn't last. It was already the afternoon by the time Nina noticed she was being followed. She turned around quickly, only to be greeted by a fist to her face. She cringed, raising a hand to the site of impact as she stumbled and fell back. Her vision was hazy, but through the pain she could make out her little brother Chris. Malcolm was holding him above the ground, sneering down at Nina as the boy struggled. Fear flooded Nina's body as she tried to force herself off the ground, wheezing breathlessly as she felt someone stomp on her stomach, forcing the air out of her. "Found you at last, bitch." Claudia stepped away from Nina, fiddling with her backpack before finally pulling out a gun. "This is my revenge for what you did to me last time." "I don't want to fight you," Nina insisted, trying again to stand up despite the pain in her ribs. Claudia suddenly cocked the gun, shooting at Nina. Nina only barely managed to roll out of the way, shocked. She stared at Claudia for a moment, her eyes wide, before finally pushing off the ground and bolting toward an abandoned house nearby. She grappled with the front door, jiggling the handle back and forth desperately until it finally sank in that the door was locked. She didn't have much time. She was sure Claudia was still on her tail. She looked around. There was a staircase to her left, going up the side of the house. It had to lead somewhere, right? She didn't even look back as she pulled herself onto the rickety steps, climbing up as fast as she could. Her pursuers shot at her, but somehow she wasn't hit. She would count her blessings if she wasn't running for her life. As it was, though, the stairs led to a bathroom accessible from the outside. She slammed the door, locking herself in. She was trapped, Claudia taunting her from outside. "Nina, are you just going to stay in there? Idiot. Did you forget what we did to your little brother?" Nina squeezed her eyes shut. "Did you forget we might do it again?" She couldn't hold back anymore. Nina almost choked on the adrenaline that forced its way through her body. She wasn't just angry anymore, she was furious. She felt her body overflowing with hatred and the desire to kill, righteously kill, as she stood up straight, finally looking around the bathroom. There weren't many things in here that could be considered weapons, but there was an iron rod. Unconventional, but she could use it. A twisted smile formed on her face as she turned it over in her hands, darting out of the bathroom and jumping off the side of the staircase. She hit the ground in a roll, keeping on moving despite how sore she was in order to avoid getting shot. She drove the iron rod through Yoni's head, tensing as he screamed in anguish, flailing on the floor. And then stopped. Nina stared for a moment, barely processing what happened as she felt something snap inside her. The thin thread holding back her bloodlust had finally broken, leaving her limitless. She relished the feeling. Even Malcolm and Claudia, who had been trying to kill her moments ago, were taken aback by the sudden violence. They took a few steps back, but Nina grinned at them coldly. Chris shivered with fear. The two tried to run, but Nina smashed the iron rod into the side of Claudia's head. Malcolm dropped Chris at once, but Nina didn't spare him even then. She brought the rod down on his head, waiting until he fell before continuously bashing it into the ground, blood pooling around him. Claudia, barely conscious and terrified, tried to reach for her gun. Nina paused, glancing back at her before kicking the gun away from her, pointing the iron rod directly at Claudia. Nina, do you feel all right?" Chris said, trying to conceal the fear he felt looking at her. Nina relaxed somewhat, giving him a sympathetic look. She didn't stop smiling. Do I feel alright? I feel great. Let's go home, my prince. Nina took Chris's hand, leading him back to the house. Chris tried not to cringe at the feeling of her blood-coated hand. Nina tried not to let her mother's fearful stare affect her when she finally got home. She hurried up to her room, pulling off her blood-covered hoodie before slamming the door behind her, grabbing a laptop. She hesitated before smiling, typing out a note. A note that, perhaps, no one would ever read. It was midnight. Nina's mother and Chris were sleeping, but she had other plans. She got up, smiling brightly at her mirror before hurrying downstairs. She was about to do the craziest thing in her life. She stepped into the kitchen, reaching for her mother's alcohol stash. She swished what remained of the vodka around in the bottle before downing it, coughing harshly at the strong flavor. Maybe it'd help with the pain, though. She rummaged through the cabinet, her irritation growing as she realized what she was looking for was missing. Where's the bleach? Looking for this? Nina startled at the sound of a voice behind her, turning around abruptly only to see a boy in her kitchen hallway, holding a bottle of bleach. He had black hair, extremely pale skin, and a slit-mouthed smile. Nina's eyes widened as she realized who it was. You're Jeff the Killer, she exclaimed. I've been watching you for a while. You've become a killer just like me, huh? He laughed, and his laughter was like music to Nina's ears. Everything she wanted was right in front of her. You're right. So I need that bottle of bleach, she said. Here, let me help you. Jeff opened the bottle, stepping forward and pouring bleach over Nina's head. She shivered at the sensation, glancing up as she heard the strike of a match. What are you waiting for? Do it, she said eagerly, her breath bated as she waited. Jeff grinned, throwing the burning match into her face. He paused for a moment, stepping back as he watched her burn. Go to sleep. Nina screamed at the visceral pain, looking to Jeff for support, but something was wrong. Jeff was gone. Jeff was gone. Jeff was gone. Jeff was... She collapsed to the floor, her breath shaky at the feeling of the fire spreading to the rest of her body as she continued to scream, her throat hoarse. Despite her attempts at self-medication, there was no way she could have been ready for the pain. She was barely aware as Chris and her mother tossed a bucket of water onto her, putting the scalding flames out. Nina's mother called the ambulance, trying to ward off the neighbors that had crowded around upon hearing the screams. Nina passed out just as she was being lifted onto the stretcher. A green-eyed neighbor watched her go. He was a boy about her age, slightly taller, with black hair and fair skin. He wanted to help, but he didn't know how. When she woke up, she was in a blank white hospital room. She tried to move, but she was far too tightly bandaged, IVs hooked up to her arms to keep her hydrated and stable. A nurse entered the room, followed closely by her mother and brother. You shouldn't move. You'll heal more quickly if you stay still. Nina glanced to her family. Chris and her mother were telling her that she was going to be okay, but the words went in one ear and out the other. After 1 month of recovery in the hospital, Nina was finally allowed to have the bandages on her face removed. Her mother and brother waited tensely to see the damage, her mother clinging tight to Chris's shoulder. Luckily, her face was surprisingly intact. Well, Miss Nina, the burns weren't as bad as they could have been. You still have most of your facial structures, and we managed to save your nose. But you were lucky your family was so quick to act. You would have lost it if they waited, the doctor said while removing what remained of the bandages. Nina's mother gasped, raising a hand to cover her mouth as Chris hid behind her. What's wrong? Nina asked, carefully getting out of the hospital bed. She walked over to the bathroom, pausing for a moment before staring into the mirror. Her skin had been bleached white. A good length of her hair had been burned off, it only reached her mid-back rather than her knees. Her skin was as soft as a marshmallow. Sis, Chris mumbled, hugging Nina. You still look as beautiful as before. He knew he was lying, though. He couldn't even look at her without feeling afraid. Oh, Chris, you're so nice, Nina said, staring down at him. But I want to be even more beautiful, she shouted, pressing her palms to the mirror. Her odd behavior confused and scared her family. Even the doctor seemed uncertain. His face is perfect. Oh, my dear Jeff, you gave me this beautiful face! She screamed, her knuckles going whiter than they already were as she pressed her digits to the mirror. Doctor? Is my daughter okay? Nina's mother asked, clearly nervous. Well, usually things improve after a few months of resting, but if her mental health doesn't improve, we'll book her in with the psych ward, the doctor replied. I see. Nina's mother grabbed Chris's hands. We have to go now. Nina gave a giggle, still eyeing her face in the mirror. Sure. The nurse handed her clothes, the same ones she'd worn on school picture day. She stared at the purple hoodie for a few moments before closing the door to get changed. She stepped out afterwards, heading home with her family. She had no idea what she'd become. She had no idea what danger she posed to the people around her. Nina smiled all the way home, grinning even as she entered the house. She paused, though, as she noticed the green-eyed boy watching her through the window. She went to see what he was doing, but he quickly ducked away. Was he ever there? That night, Nina's mother woke up to the sound of a young girl sobbing. Her eyes snapped open and she pushed herself out of bed, being as quiet as she could as she approached the source of the sound. Her heart sank when she saw that Nina's bedroom door was open. She stepped inside, struggling to make out anything in the darkness that blanketed the room. She reached over to turn the lights on, her heart skipping a beat as she realized the walls were covered in blood. Her gaze snapped to the bed. Nina was repeatedly stabbing the lifeless body of a girl. She just kept stabbing her with a kitchen knife, her back facing her mother. The girl's intestines and internal organs had been removed, strewn all across the bed. Nina's clothes were soaked with blood. She paused at the light turning on, leaning back and staring at the ceiling. She used to bully me at school, Nina whispered, keeping her eyes glued to the ceiling. Mama, I'm becoming more beautiful, she exclaimed, suddenly whipping her head around to face her. Nina's face was really bad. Her mouth had been slit into a permanent smile, and her eyes, though not mutilated, were so wide that Nina's mother felt that they burned holes through her. I'm so tired of being worried. I'm so tired of being sad and suffering all the time. Now I'll smile forever. People will always see my beautiful face. She paused, letting the silence linger for a moment. This is the face that Jeff gave me. Am I beautiful, Mama? Nina's mother couldn't help but take a few steps back, shaking her head frantically. No! She choked on the words as they came out. Nina, you've become a monster! You've killed someone! Nina's mother began running, but Nina was in hot pursuit. Killing people when they run is so much fun, she sang, staying right on her tail. Just as Nina's mother was about to open Chris's bedroom door to wake him up to warn him, Nina drove her knife through the back of her skull. She paused for a moment before ripping it back out. Her mother's lifeless body fell to the ground. It's kinda sad that Mom doesn't think I'm beautiful. So sad. Chris woke up with a start. He didn't know why, but he felt like he was in danger. The sickening smell of iron permeated the air, but he was too young to realize what that meant. The door slowly opened, revealing Nina's silhouette. Chris paused for a moment, pulling his sheets down to see who was there. It was just his sister. Just his sister. But why was she holding a knife? He buried his face in his pillow, hoping and praying that it was only a dream. Chris, Nina whispered, kneeling down beside his bed. Am I beautiful? Chris stayed silent, gripping his pillow ever tighter. Oh, come on, Chris, I didn't do anything bad. She hid a hand behind her back, crossing her fingers. You know, I feel so much better now. Let's start a new life. Will you come with me? Nina shuffled closer to Chris, perking up as he finally pulled his head out of the pillow. Her little brother Chris nodded at her. Oh, good boy. Well, if you want to join me, well, just go to sleep, my prince. Nina kicked open the front door of the house while carrying her little brother on her back. Chris was dead. He was smiling innocently, almost looking like he could just be asleep. His eyes were wide open. He could still be alive, could still be looking at her right now. But he was dead. Nina knew that. She had killed him herself. She was the reason his little body was riddled with stab wounds, the reason blood dripped from his graying skin. She stepped into the front garden, adjusting her little brother in her arms and looking at him for a long moment. Chris, she hesitated. There was some semblance of emotions in her eyes, but it was unreadable to her as it would be to anyone else. "I'll kill more people, I'll put them to sleep, just like I did for you." She laid him down on the ground, running a hand through his hair before standing up straight, staring at his body for a moment. Then, leaving her home behind, she stepped into the streets. Hey everyone! Thanks so much for watching my video! If you'd like to subscribe and like and comment, I'd be much obliged. But jokes aside, I just wanted to say I really appreciate all of you, and this took like a week to do. Because, rewriting Nina's story really burned me out, and as you can see, this is my longest video yet. It is half an hour long. So, yeah, thank you for watching, and please consider it.